So shalom, everybody. Welcome. It's April the 19th.
Shalom.
April 19th, we're talking about, this week is Parsha Aharei Kedoshim. Today is also the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising on the secular calendar. We're obviously mindful of that, despite the fact that Yom HaShoah actually commemorates it closer to the date during Passover. At any rate, we are doing this parsha. I always want to say these are great parshas. These are amazing parshas, and they are. And I thought, erroneously, that because there's so much material here, it would be so easy to choose something to talk about. That in fact it made it much more difficult to select something, because we are familiar with a lot of the laws and rules that are found in specifically Parshat Kedoshim, including perhaps one of the most famous or most often quoted verses in the Bible, love your neighbor as yourself, which appears in chapter 19. We are also familiar with the opening passages of Aharei because they are the passages of atonement, the rites of the Yom Kippur. And I've been so inclined to discuss rituals. I thought that we might do that, except for the fact that we've probably done it in the past, and we've done a lot of rituals, analysis of rituals. So I'm choosing a different text today, and I don't really have a lot of visual information. I've been enjoying finding videos to illustrate things and hockey analogies, but well, give me a chance, and I'll come up with something for this week. The chapter is chapter 18, and the verses that we're going to look at are really the opening verses of chapter 18, verses 1 to 5. And I'm going to show you that there's a lot going on here. We're going to see that this is the basis of the idea of pikuach nefesh. And the pikuach nefesh means saving life, and the idea, the principle of saving life, which we'll get into later on in this class. But before that, I think there's another story going on, and that's been kind of the theme here. The theme is that each of these verses, each of these little sections, really reveals a story behind the story. And I'm trying to figure out what is being stated here. That's not only a question of interpretation, it's a question of what is this conversing with? What are the text trying to relate to? So with no further ado, we're going to go to the text now. I'm going to put it up on the screen, and it is as follows right here. Here we go. So this is, and you shall live by them. The text is, and it's really going to be the first few verses. I'm going to just make it a little bigger for all of us older people that need magnifying. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. My rules alone shall you observe, and faithfully follow my laws. I, the Lord, am your God. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live. I am the Lord." So I want to focus on those 5 verses, but I want to just go into a couple of these verses, and you'll get the idea really quickly what it's talking about. Verse 6. None of you shall come near any one of his own flesh to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. Your father's nakedness, that is the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover. She is your mother, you shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so what you have here ensuing in chapter 18 really is what the scholars call the definition of family. If you read the JPS commentary, basically they say this is, the rules outline the family, what are the prohibited and permitted relationships in the family structure, and obviously these are the sexual relationships. And of course, by defining the family relationships and the sexual relationships, you're defining the boundaries of peoplehood, who you can and cannot create, children with, basically, but also who you can and cannot have intimate relations with, and that not only defines your family, but we understand intuitively that shapes the character of your culture, of your people. In so saying, that the family is defined by the preservation of the dignity of all of the individuals within the confines of your roof, your domicile, and specifically protects those who would be most vulnerable to you. But that's not what I want to talk about. I think we can put that on the shelf and know that that is the reference point for the preamble here in verses 1 to 5. In Hebrew, the words are a little vague. Ani Adonai Elohechem k'ma'aseh eretz Mitzrayim asher yeshavtem ba lo ta'asu. Like the way they do, k'ma'aseh eretz Mitzrayim, in which you go, which you were, lo ta'asu, u'k'ma'aseh eretz Canaan asher ani mevi'etchem shama lo ta'asu. The way, and according to the way that the Canaanites do, and I'm bringing you there, don't do. U'v'chukoteim lo telechu. And I'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to focus on the Hebrew text, and I'm going to show you, stop that. I'm going to show you how the Hebrew text develops this. Okay, here we go. All right, so here's I've broken it up to make it look more interesting and to show you that again, it's not that there's poetry going on here, although one could argue that there certainly is something interesting going on here, literarily. There's enough attention to the patterns of the language here to actually make a point. And this comes under the category of the form of a text helps us understand its content. I have to say that even after reading the English translation, I am guessing that most people would go like, yeah, okay, so like, yeah, I get it. Like, don't do what the Canaanites do, right? That's what you're telling me, right? And it's the English translation is very wordy, and it is not disclosing to you, I think, a different story. And so pedagogically here, I'm going to just kind of hint that the story really is about life and death. And I'm going to show you that, I'm going to prove that to you or try and demonstrate that to you. But I didn't want to, make too much, give you too much suspense. The suspense here is how we're going to get to that. All right. So we have, I wrote it out like this, like a tablet, basically. Ani Adonai Elohechem. I am the Lord your God. Okay, so that's a statement, right? And the implication of a statement, I am the Lord your God, is, this is really important. I'm putting my signature on it. Okay, um, and it goes like this: Kema'aseh eretz Mitzrayim asher yeshavtem ba lo ta'asu. Okay, so we have the next clause: Uchema'aseh eretz Canaan asher ani mevi etchem shama. And like the Canaanites, the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you, lo tasu. Don't do. Uvuchukotehem lo telechu. All right? And I'm going to move to my next slide because I have this all color-coded. Here we go. You can see here in the colors here, all the repeated phrases. We're going to start with Kema'aseh eretz Mitzrayim and Kema'aseh eretz Canaan. The importance of mentioning the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan is very simple. You are a people that is going to be defined by your difference with the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan. I like to say all the time that there's a geographical idea going on in the Bible altogether, that Israel, certainly the later, in the later books of the Bible, in the kingdom of Israel, is defined by its opposition to Egyptian culture and to Babylonian culture. In Egypt, they worship, the sun, and in Babylonia, they worship Baal. But the land of Israel establishes a culture and a religious worldview that is in opposition and possibly in oppositional defiance to both the major cultures of the day. It has to navigate itself between the superpower of its time. But here we are navigating not between Egypt and Babylonia, we're navigating between Egypt and Canaan. To the people that have experienced the Exodus, Canaan is off in the distance. They understand what Egyptian existence was because they lived there. Up until now, our understanding of Egypt has been shaped by a number of things. Our understanding of Egypt has been shaped by the experience of slavery and the experience of the Pharaoh as the demigod of Egypt. And our understanding of Egypt has been shaped by the Bible's already previous kind of light-hearted way of poking fun at Egyptian culture and Egyptian civilization by highlighting the fact that it's a civilization that is based on death. When the Israelites say, "Hami bli ein kvarim b'Mitzrayim lekachtenu lamut," was it for a lack of graves in Egypt that you took us to die in the desert? They're actually making reference to the fact that Egypt is filled with monuments to the dead. Unlike the misunderstanding that most people have about the Israelites and slavery, it was not the Hebrew slaves that built the pyramids. The pyramids were in Egypt long before the Israelites were there. Okay, we did not build the pyramids. Sorry, Menachem Begin, who said that. We built storage cities, and all around in Egypt were monuments and graves and tombs and sepulchres and all sorts of things that monumentalize the dead, precisely because Egypt was a society that venerated the dead. So we already are aware of that about Egypt. But that's not what we're talking about here. Uchema'aseh eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan, we don't know anything about Canaan yet either. Well, or do we? We know we have one little hint about the land of Canaan prior to going there, at least according to the book of Genesis. Does anybody recall anything connected to Canaan in the land of Canaan? Go ahead. Yes, Marlene.
Oh. Abraham and Terach and the idols.
So Avram and Terach actually were not in Canaan. Abraham was in Ur Kasdim when he smashed the idols. That's of course not in the Bible itself. Okay, Ilana?
Not exactly Canaan, but Dom. I don't know if, but the
Sodom is in
influence.
Canaan. Okay, so
And Joseph and Yaakov,
right.
where were they living?
They were living in Canaan. So they are aware that their ancestors lived in Canaan, but I'm going back even further to some what would have been their mythology. And their mythology, which would have been known to everybody, is the mythology of creation and the story of Noah. At the end of the story of Noah, in Noah chapter 9, there is this very, very obscure event. I'm just going to try and get there 1 second. And the event at the end of Noah is where Noah gets drunk, okay, and then he curses Canaan. I'm sorry, I got this chat going on here. I can't read the chat. There we go. So this is chapter 9, and it's chapter 9, verse, it's in the 20s here. All right, so the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japhet, Ham being the father of Canaan. Okay, so that's the first mention of Canaan in the Bible. And the Bible is speaking to an audience that is obviously familiar with who Canaan or what Canaan is. So it's like saying, come gather around the fire, everybody. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm a story about Noah and Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Ham was the father of Canaan. Canaan, that's where the land we're in. Okay, so these were the 3 sons of Noah from whom the whole world reached out. Noah, the tiller of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japhet took a cloth, placed it against both their backs, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so that they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke up from his wine and learned what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, let Canaan be a slave to them. May God enlarge Japhet, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them." All right, so that's a very obscure passage. It's very hard to understand that passage. What exactly happened? What exactly happened to Noah? What exactly the Ham did to Noah? And what exactly Shem and Japhet did? And what exactly those blessings are? So without going into it in great detail, obviously because it's obscure and we're just offering some conjectures here. Whatever it involved, it did involve nakedness, and nakedness is also a euphemism of sex. So what Noah is doing in his tent naked, we don't know, okay? All right? We don't know what he's doing, but obviously it's something that is not particularly honorable to him. Ham sees this, and what does the text say again? The text says,
Brothers.
Ham sees it, and he, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's naked and told his brothers outside. So what does that mean? That he told his brothers outside? If he sees his father's nakedness, if he sees his father lying there naked in some kind of sexually compromised position, either whatever, by himself or with, it doesn't really say there was anybody else with him, but if he sees him there naked in a compromised position and drunk, and he goes and tells his brothers about it, what does that mean? How would you interpret that? Go ahead, Bob.
One possibility, it's certainly a form of Lashon Hara.
Yes, it's definitely a form of slander, a form of Lashon Hara, a form of really disgracing their father. What else is going on here? If you can just kind of even get
he has disdain for his father, and he's talking about it.
So there's disdain for his father. There's also a kind of ridicule of his father. Look at our father. Look at my father. And there is.
Maybe he's thinking that if Dad can do it, we can do it. How about it, guys? And they don't agree, so they back in. But he didn't seem. We don't know his tone of voice when he says to his brothers what he saw.
Right. Go ahead. So there's crassness there. Skip. Go ahead.
I guess I have a question.
Okay.
Is reality a form of Lashon Hara?
Say the reality. So good question. You know, is he reporting to them, or is he kind of there is a sense here, and I am interpreting and providing a kind of layer to this. There's the layer of interpretation here is that when you tell something about your father that is something that you don't think your father would want anyone else to know about, that's not telling reality. That's making fun of. And that's ridicule, that's disdain, and that is also a form of really it's crass. Look at the brothers Shem and Yafet relate to their naked father. They don't want to look at him. They are embarrassed then. They're ashamed for him, and so therefore they walk in backwards to cover him. Okay, so. Whereas Cham is saying, look at this guy lying there, splayed out there, naked, and he's trying to get the brothers to share in that. The brothers, by their own character, have a certain appreciation of their father's basic humanity. And so what we are having here, what I'm going to kind of deduce from this is that Cham is defined by his moral depravity, and his moral depravity is deeply associated with his sexual mores, in that he does not distinguish by his very nature that his father's nakedness is something that needs to be preserved, like he's sheltered, that he needs to shield the other brothers from it. He doesn't do the decent thing, which is say, oh, my father's dignity has been violated by his own drunkenness. He co-opts this. He takes it to a different level. Okay.
What's he doing in his father's bedroom anyway? When the door is shut, stay out.
I think that's up to anybody's guess, and of course we could become very wild in our imaginations here as to what he's doing. It could have been he's just checking up on his father, or it could have been that his father, he hadn't seen his father. His father was drunk, and by the way, his father has reason to be drunk. His father is when you read Elie Wiesel's analysis of the story of Noah, it's very fascinating. His father can't deal with the reality of the destruction and his own survival. The father is the quintessentially guilty survivor guilt. And the fact that he is overwhelmed by everything that's around him, and being a survivor and having had his children already puts him at a disadvantage of what his own purpose of life is. And not only that, but you get the sense with Noah that there's a lingering sense of his own question. Did I do enough? Did I, why didn't I save people? And so Noah's drunkenness is a form of escape. And notice that there are two facets of it. One is the drunkenness, and the other is the sexuality. So it's not a far reach to say that Noah just wants to he's not suicidal here, but he just doesn't want to deal with the reality that that's around him. The reality is too overwhelming. And Ham, rather than identify with his father's struggles and be sympathetic to his father, is simply just castigates his father and ridicules his father. Okay.
Why do you interpret it that way instead of saying that he went out to tell his brothers, we have a problem, what can we do to help our father? I
think the sense is, and of course it's a really good question. The sense is that he's in a rush to tell them, not that their father is in trouble, but look at our father. It's the sense is, I'm going to go back to the text again and see again that Vayar Cham Avi Canaan et ervat Avi. Cham, the father, saw his father's nakedness. Okay, so yes, you could say, well, he just happened to see it. But I'm connecting the dots in a different way here. I'm connecting the dots and saying that based on his seeing, and based on the kind of the darting into the father's tent here, which is implied, and based on the fact that in verse 24 Noah wakes up and learns what his youngest son had done to him. He learns what his youngest. So there's something about what his youngest son did to him that he didn't find particularly pleasing. And so how he makes that conclusion is also not known. So what we're left with is constructing a story that's based on a few hints here. One hint is that he just darts in there. Second hint is that he's not happy with what Ham did. Third hint is that the two other brothers, while they react in a totally different way, which is instead of joking about their father, they walk in backwards and they cover him. Which Ham, although he saw him, he could have instead of go out and say to his brothers, he could have himself covered his father. Go ahead, Skip.
I seem to think that the brother put his father on a pedestal. And when he came into the tent, he realized that the father wasn't, the greatest that there was out there.
Yeah, that's very possible. I think that's there's a lot of lovely nuance in that reading of it, because what he's experiencing in the sight of the naked father is the collapse of the heroic persona.
Correct. Absolutely.
And he can't handle that. Go ahead, Ilana.
It shows that Noah is very irresponsible, because it's mentioned he uncovered himself. Why couldn't he stay covered for whatever he wanted to do? So that's not a good side about Noah.
It's not a good sign about Noah. Noah definitely did not want to stay covered. He wanted to uncover. Okay, I don't know what he did, but and I don't know who he did it with. There's no record of anybody else in there. However, nakedness is a hint in the Bible for sexual some sexual offense. Who else? Bob, then Gittel.
Just a couple of quick comments. One is that in an archetypic way, it seems like a whole sense of violations of the Kedoshim, the Holy Code, are taking place in this story. It also seems like the issue you often raise about crossing boundaries is also coming out. And the third, which is, I'm trying to think, Mitzrayim also is translated, isn't it, as the narrow place?
Yes.
And to what degree does Canaan represent the opposite of the narrow place, which is anything goes in terms of paganism? And so we're balancing between narrowness and anything goes.
I think those 2 points are really salient, because what we are talking about here, and we're going to see this in the text back in Leviticus, we're talking about, ma'aseh, the act, and ma'aseh is not named. I think even in the word ma'aseh, there's a euphemism for sexual depravity, or the sense of that anything goes sexually. The fact that the very next passage discloses exactly what kinds of relationships you can have suggests that in Egypt or Canaan, anything was possible. In fact, in the scholarship on this, they write about Egyptian society. Egyptian society actually witnessed sibling marriages in royal families. So the idea that there could be sexual relationships between siblings, that is something that's a contact piece of information, and the idea that you could have relationships based on power, sexual relations based on power, that is to say, between the monarch and the subordinate, or between the master and the slave, that's also a part of Egyptian society. And that in terms of the guardrails that we now know of in our moral society, in terms of forbidden and permitted relationships, they didn't exist in the same way that the Torah is listing here. That's certainly in Egypt. And as far as Canaan is concerned, Canaan was altogether understood as a licentious and sexually depraved society. Look at what we have in Canaan just back in Genesis. We have this incident with Ham, whose son is Canaan, and I'll get to the incident. Why is it that Canaan is cursed even though Ham did it? So Canaan is Ham's son, and Mitzrayim is related to Ham. Ham is Mitzrayim's father, okay, in the table of nations. Mitzrayim, the individual who is the founder of the nation of Mitzrayim, as indicated by Genesis chapter 10, he is a Hamite, okay? We are Semites. We are the descendants of Shem, of Sem, of the Semites. The Greeks are the descendants of Japhet. The Europeans are the Japhetites, okay? Just give you one more second on this, and you've heard me say this before, but what you have here is the three groupings of the world based on the what they understood to be the geography of their world, which was you had Europe, Asia, and Africa. Europe is Japhet, Asia is Shem, and Africa is Ham. The Europeans, Japhet, Yavan, Ashkenaz, Togarma, those are all descendants of Japhet. The Ever and the Hittite, these are the descendants of Shem, and Mitzrayim and all the African nations are descendants of Ham. So Canaan is a descendant of Ham too, and Canaan, back to other indicators of Canaan's sexual depravity. So we have another incident of sexual immorality in Genesis with a Canaanite, and that is Shem ben Hamor, who rapes Dinah. The one encounter that one of the early encounters that happens between Canaan and Israel is a rape. The third instance is Esav marries a Canaanite woman. They don't like that. Isaac and Rebecca don't like. Rebecca certainly doesn't like it. Isaac, doesn't really see. But this she can't stand this. Okay, the reason why she can't stand it is not stated, but I'm going to state it here. Those Canaanite women, that you don't want, and so on and on we could say, and even there's one Canaanite woman who breaks the mold, and this is Tamar, who is Judah's daughter-in-law. Tamar is a Canaanite. She's the daughter of Shua, and she marries Judah's son. But Judah is not particularly kind to her, because after the death of, she marries the first son dies, the second son she marries, also, and he dies. He promises her that he will marry her off to fulfill the Levirate obligation to his third son, Shelah, and he then does not go forward with it. So she has a claim on him, and she dresses up as a prostitute and seduces Judah. So here, in a way, you have the model of Canaanite sexual depravity being flipped on its head, and that there is a Canaanite who, using that ruse, actually becomes a model of righteousness. But by and large, in all the other cases, anything to do with Canaanites is not particularly good. So this brings us back to our text. You're going from the place of Egypt, where they don't care about these things, where they marry off their siblings to each other in the royal household, and they sleep with whoever they want to sleep with. And you're going to Canaan, where they rape and pillage, and they also don't really care about sexual morality, and where sexuality is intrinsic to the pagan worship. That's the other statement. that there is sexuality is deployed in sacred precincts. Okay, now our ancient ancestors did not think that this was a good thing. They certainly understood the importance of sexuality, and they certainly understood that sexuality was not a sin and not sinful behavior, but part of the natural order. But they understood something about sexuality and its proximity to the edges of human experience, and they wanted to maintain the sacredness of sexuality within the human experience and define it apart from the ritual experience. Okay, so back to our text here on Kimaseh. So, hang on. So here's our text. So I've talked about Maaseretz Mitzrayim, Maaseretz Canaan, that the Israelites find themselves between these two places that are defined by their sexual immorality. Asher yeshaftem ba, asher ani mevi etchem shama. You dwelt there, you're going to go there. Lo ta'asu, lo ta'asu. An emphasis on the acts that they do, don't do. You cannot behave that way. It's, we would say in Yiddish, pasnish, right? You can't behave that way. And then it says, u'v'chukotehem lo telechu. U'v'chukotehem lo telechu, which means, and their laws, don't walk in their laws. Whose laws are they referring to? Is it Canaan's laws, or is it Egypt's laws, or is it both of them? I think that this u'v'chukotehem refers back to both Egypt and Canaan. In other words, what God is saying here is, when you go into the land, you structure your moral life not according to them, not according to Egypt or to Canaan. You don't do their wanton sexual immorality, and you don't even follow their laws. Their behavior is one thing, and their laws enshrine their behaviors. So the story here is a story of culture. The story of culture is they have this culture, they do this, and to us it seems to be random and not ordered, but they also have ordering principles that enshrine their culture, which make it permissible for brothers and sisters to sleep with each other. Okay? And now it says as follows, verse Daled, Et mishpatai ta'asu, ve'chukotai tishmeru. It introduces here a new concept. The new concept is mishpat, the new concept of statutes, my rules. In other words, we cannot let you just live alone by the laws of nature. That is to say, whoever you want to sleep with. You want to sleep with your brother? You want to sleep with your sister? Go ahead. No, we have rules. All right? You have to follow the rules here. V'chukotai tishmeru, a new concept. That is to say, to keep the rules. And you have mishpat, and you have to keep. La'lechet bahem, to go in them. Ani Adonai Elohechem. I am the Lord your God. And then it says as follows. It links the two concepts, mishpat and chukotai. Look at it basically is the ABBA form. Mishpat, chukot, mishpat. So we have this nice compression here. Ushmartem et chukotai vet mishpatai. You follow my laws and my statutes. Asher yaseh otam ha'adam, that the person, the human being, will do v'chai bahem, and live by them, ani Adonai. And so v'chai bahem, I put this in black and white here, v'chai bahem is really the punchline of the whole thing. What we're talking about here is a conflict of life and death. Egyptian society and Canaanite society are societies in which anything goes. Anything goes sexually, and anything goes ritually, and in terms of, in the very most, they do have laws there, but the laws are not moral laws. It would be like saying, the Soviet Union had laws, but what's the point of laws that are not morally based, right? If power is the only arbiter of human relationships and desire is the only thing that creates the bonds between people and not the sense between the sexes and not the structures of civilization, then what you have is anarchy, and what you have ultimately is death. So we are trying to create then a society built on law, built on statutes, and built on the relationships that are necessary in order to make a society progress and make a society live. Without those relationships, and what will then be described in the next chapter as the sanctity of those relationships, you have a society that will be ultimately die. So this is a narrative then between life and death. Canaan and Mitzrayim represent death, and the life that you're going to establish in the land of Israel represents life. Okay, so that's the story within the story. I'll stop there for any questions or comments. We have another piece of this. Anybody? You want to chat here? Okay. So yeah, Justice. So many of you might be, go ahead, Bob.
At the risk of bringing up a controversial subject, then what I wrestle with here is, in our own society, if we're applying these laws dealing with LGBTQ issues in terms of the laws and policies that exist in our land and how that gets reconciled with what's here, as well as the issues of don't engage in immoral sexual behavior, but don't oppress and engage in racism and other sorts of things.
So it's a fascinating question related to these passages, because in chapter 18 you'll have the rule about homosexuality, and you'll have it later in chapter 20 also. So a couple of years ago when we did these, I read from Jacob Milgram's commentary, and this is a one volume digest of his commentary. He's got a three volume big doorstopper commentary, and he talks about homosexuality in the context here of these relationships of power. And I just want to, if you give me a second, I'll read his paragraph here. Does the Bible prohibit homosexuality? His answer, of course it does, but the prohibition is severely limited. Listen to this. There's a certain genius in the way he presents it. The prohibition against homosexuality is limited. First, it is addressed only to Israel, not to other nations. Second, compliance with this law is a condition for residing in the Holy Land, but is irrelevant outside it. Third, it is limited to men. Lesbianism is not prohibited. Thus, it is incorrect to apply this prohibition on a universal scale. So in a way, what he's done here is really a masterful piece of biblical interpretation. He's saying the facts. The facts are, yes, it's prohibited, but it's prohibited among men, it's prohibited to Israel, and it's prohibited in the land, because the major criteria of the land is to live in these kind of ordered relationships. But then he goes on. Moreover, as pointed out, both occurrences of the prohibition contain the phrase, as one lies with a woman, an idiom used only for illicit heterosexual unions. Thus, one could argue that carnal relations are forbidden only if their correlated heterosexual unions would be in these lists. For example, the Bible lists the following prohibited relations: nephew, aunt, grandfather, granddaughter, stepmother, stepson. Thus, according to this theory, nephew, uncle, grandfather, grandson, stepfather, stepson are also forbidden. This implies that the homosexual prohibition does not cover all male liaisons, but only those within the limited circle of family. However, homosexual relations with unrelated males are neither prohibited nor penalized. Admittedly, more than 2 occurrences of the phrase, as one lies with a woman, are needed before accepting this argument as definitive. As I meant, as Milgram says, in the entire list of forbidden sexual unions, there's no prohibition against lesbianism. Can it be that lesbianism did not exist in ancient times, or that Scripture was unaware of its existence? Lesbianism existed and flourished, as attested in an old pre-Israelite Babylonian omen text, and in the work of the lesbian poet Sappho, who came from the island of Lesbos. But in the eyes of the Bible, there is a fundamental difference between the homosexual acts of men and women. In lesbianism, there is no spilling of seed, thus life is not symbolically lost, and it is for that reason, in my opinion, that lesbianism is not prohibited in the Bible. Thus, from the Bible, we can infer the following: the female half of the world's homosexual population, lesbians, are not mentioned. Over 99% of the remaining gays, namely non-Jews, are not addressed. This leaves the small number of Jewish gay men subject to this prohibition. To those who argue that the Bible enjoins homosexuality, a careful reading of the source text offers a fundamentally different view. While the Bible never applauds homosexuality, neither does it prohibit most people from engaging it. So there you have, I think, a master stroke of interpretation, saying, look, you could be tempted to take the Bible and give the fire and brimstone sermon from the pulpit and behave as a religious leader and say the Bible says so. But you could also say, and he argues, I think quite compellingly, that while the Bible says so, the Bible is also, in its context, speaking about very, very limited kinds of things. And it's not saying that we don't accept regret. It's saying that these kinds of relationships do not constitute family relationships as they would in heterosexual unions. And these kinds of relationships are also, and it's argued elsewhere, they're about the deployment of power and subjugation. The Bible certainly doesn't address and know of what we understand today in both the formation of gay identity and also relationships. That's the answer to that question. So we're not on shaky ground here, but we are on the ground that is saying, in terms of morality, and sexuality, there's a lot more to sexuality and sexual morality than same-sex relationships. And indeed, given the fact that only a small minority of individuals engage in same-sex relationships, the majority of sex relationships are heterosexual relationships, and that's sort of the majority of illicit moral activity takes place. And so that's what's being addressed here. Okay. So back to the issue of v'chai bahem, and you shall live by them. Well, the term v'chai bahem is the basis of understanding of pikuach nefesh. So what's interesting here is that in this context, these two words, v'chai bahem, and you shall live by them, makes reference to the oppositional defiance of Israelite culture against the Egyptian and Canaanite culture, and that it's about family. But placed within the context of, Greco-Roman culture and also Christian culture later, the rabbis are using these two words as words that really define Judaism. These are the laws that you shall live by, v'chai bahem shelo yamut bahem, and not die by them. In other words, if you are in a conflict between life and death and also keeping the laws, you have to choose life. You have to live. V'chai bahem. So if you are in danger of your life and it is the Sabbath, you have to suspend the laws of Sabbath in order to save your life. If you are in any kind of danger, if you are in need of food on Yom Kippur, you can suspend the fast of Yom Kippur in order to survive. There are obviously people who need to have a daily source of nourishment, and for whom even fasting for a small period of time is a dangerous thing. So could you say that Judaism compels you to risk your life in order to observe the commandments? And the answer is, it won't do that because it values life above everything else, except for in the three circumstances where you must lay down your life. And that is idolatry, sexual morality, and also murder. That is to say, if someone says, commit idolatry or on pain of death, you have to lay down your life. Commit an act of sexual depravity or lay down your life, you have to lay down your life. Or murder someone else, or else you will be murdered, you have to lay down your life. Under those three circumstances alone is what we now call martyrdom required. Okay, those are extreme circumstances. Most of us obviously will not encounter those circumstances, even though possibly for our ancestors they encountered them many more times. the sources go into some depth about martyrdom and saying that even in times of persecution for smaller things, you are permitted to lay down your life. And in fact, our history is, of course, filled with acts of martyrdom under the circumstances of persecution. All of the religions, and I suppose all cultures, have their point of martyrdom. At what point do you say, I risk my life? I will put down my life. And it's usually, it's the usual case that people will put down their lives for the sake of saving others, or for the sake of the higher ideals. You know, give me liberty or give me death is an American ideal. You know, it's on the New Hampshire license plate, I think. You know, live free or die. I mean, these are you know, American ideals. When you take them out of their context, and of course do not associate, you know, them with the tyranny that the people who express these ideas had experienced, then they don't really mean anything. But if people are experiencing tyranny and they want to make, you know, lay down their lives so that everyone can be free, then that is what we call, in the Jewish context, Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name. You know, think about oppressed peoples all over the world, you know, who are fighting for their freedom and willing to risk everything for their freedom. I mean, looking at, you know, people in Iran today. I don't want to get started on the negotiations, but just the Iranians who live in Iran and are subject to the tyranny and terror of the theocratic state, you know, and are filmed in defying the theocrats, are risking their lives. I saw a video yesterday of someone who accosted an Iranian cleric and started yelling and screaming at them, and was being filmed at the same time, and saying, you know, saying to these people, you know, you really need to, you know, we can't handle you anymore. You're killing us. You're killing us. And he's being filmed doing this. And I'm wondering, you know, if he's still alive. You know, the regime, you know, sees him on a video and basically finds him and will execute him very quickly. So there are people who, in defiance, are risking their lives and who are being properly venerated as martyrs. You know, every culture will see its martyrdom in other ways. You know, we have a very strong issue with examples of martyrdom in other cultures, where martyrdom is used as an excuse to murder others, and that you can die in the service of God by killing other people. That, of course, we see as a great evil and a great misuse of God's name, and a waste of life, and also the most dastardly form of evil possible. But in Judaism recognizes that there are some limits to your religious life, and that one limit is that you have to live, right? There are numerous explanations for pikuach nefesh, for saving a life, but there are different sources for that idea. One source says you should, you know, the juxtaposition of living is placed next to the commandment for Shabbat. So the rabbis understand that you can save your life, suspend the laws of Shabbat in order to save your life, in order that you'll keep more Shabbat. Right? You're not supposed to die on Shabbat if you can save yourself, because the idea is that you need to have more Shabbat. So save your, you know, suspend the laws one Shabbat, you know, rush yourself by ambulance to the hospital, make sure you get every single kind of, you know, treatment that you can on Shabbat, in order that you can have many more Shabbatot. And this becomes, I think, a defining feature of Judaism. All religions then are defined by where they put that line, where where they put the line between life and death, and where they put the line in terms of what you'll sacrifice for. Judaism, I think, has such a strong emphasis on life that it will allow for every violation possible, Shabbat, Kashrut, the ritual laws, also, except for those three areas, in order to preserve your life. I think that that's a rather fascinating statement, and it's derived from this verse, at least in one context. Any other?
Also, הבא להרגך,
Yes.
השכם והרגהו.
Right. Someone comes to kill you, you have the obligation to rise up and kill them first, because the obligation of self-defense overrides the prohibition against murder. Keeping your life, saving your life. Okay. Well, I said that this would be a difficult parsha. Go ahead, Bob.
Just want to get back to Ham and Canaan, and I wonder if you have any comments on the fact that that was used by some to justify slavery and racism, given the curse and the focus on Africa.
So there's no question that we have a very sad experience with the Bible in its deployment to justify every evil